Welcome back to API Kitchen, where we cook up secure APIs. I'm confident Stably, the chef de cuisine in this unique kitchen. Today's episode, we are securing the data transmission of our API dishes. Imagine this: we prepared a gourmet meal, which is, in this context, our API's data, to be delivered to the dining room. But we're sending it out uncovered, exposed to potential contamination. Ew! On the internet, this is like transmitting sensitive customer information over the old HTTP highway, unprotected and prone to data theft. Serving our data on this open road is inviting trouble. It's as if we are announcing our secret ingredients over a loudspeaker, giving every passerby a chance to listen in and worse, tamper with the dish. This is no way to treat our exclusive recipes, is it? Here are some steps to fix this API security issue. Step 1. Upgrade to a secure conveyor, SSL and TLS. To keep our data delivery pristine, we need to upgrade our serving method. SSL and TLS encryption is our gourmet food carrier. It's the equivalent of a secure, temperature-controlled cart that ensures the dish gets to the table just as we intended. No alterations and no compromises. Step 2. Sealing the deal with HSTS to make sure that every time we send out a dish, it goes through our secure cart. We employ HSTS, which is HTTP Strict Transport Security. It's like making a rule in our kitchen that every dish must be covered when it's out for delivery. This policy tells browsers to only use secure connections when communicating with our kitchen. No exceptions. Step 3. Ensuring full coverage. Just like our kitchen has multiple exits, our API might be accessed through various points. We need to enforce SSL and TLS at all of these points. API gateways, load balancers, even down to the service mesh. This blanket of security wraps around our APIs like a well-knit tablecloth, leaving no room for mishaps. Now, let's join today's virtual kitchen guest and talk about fixing this security issue. Our guest for today is Dr. Obadare, with specialties in vulnerability management, penetration testing, and computer forensics. Dr. Obadare is arguably the most credentialed global digital trust leader, cybersecurity strategist, and GRC thought leader. You're welcome to the API Kitchen, sir.
My pleasure to be here. Yeah, Global Confidence. Pleased to be here.
So I'm just going to go straight on to the questions because we've been itching to have you here. I'm sure you've come across cases where API endpoints handle sensitive customer data over HTTP, leaving the data vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attacks in your work advising organizations. So I'd like you to share your thoughts on how you might resolve this. I want you to share your thoughts on how you can improve the security of this kind of APIs, both in cases where the customer has a large budget and in more economical context where there are budget constraints and these budget constraints are severe.
All right. Okay. Thank you for that great question. I think I'd like to start from the beginning. And the beginning is, why is there the use of HTTP, commonly used on internet? Yes, of course, by API as well. Because the reality is, when you look at the beginning of the internet, most of the common protocols are the likes of the HTTP, facilitating data transfer on the internet. So when API actually came into being, and then there is the proliferation of APIs now, it is just a safe haven for everyone to just, use API. So that's why HTTP is the most commonly used protocol for data transfer on the internet, because primarily it is fast, it is efficient. But unfortunately, from security standpoint of view, what a lot of professionals do not understand is HTTP protocol is a stateless protocol. What do I mean by that? A stateless protocol means that every request, right, is independent of the previous request. So, unlike when you have a connection-oriented protocol, you understand, HTTP, right, though it is fast, it facilitates data transfer efficiently, but it is not good for security. So it means that if anyone is dropping on the communication, it is very possible for that malicious actor to intercept that data communication. And now, from the question that you asked, When you're now talking about sensitive data, right? And when you're talking about sensitive data, we could look at, health record. You could look at user credentials. We could talk about payment information. Believe me, it will be bad for any responsible organization to use HTTP because that means everything is going to be in clear text. Clear text means that if the malicious actor is dropping, it can actually intercept all that data. That is why it is highly recommended that the use of HTTPS, it is mandatory when you are talking about sensitive data. HTTPS means that you are implementing TLS encryption on the HTTP protocol, making it, to facilitate essentially all the security parameters, like, when you're talking about security controls like confidentiality, integrity, authenticity, and it also helps in enhancing data privacy as well. So which is why it's very important to use HTTPS. So, but now looking at economic constraints, to be honest, in my experience, I actually don't think whether it's a small, large business organization, buying a certificate today is actually not that expensive. Honestly speaking, it is not that expensive. But I want to carefully use the word, I think for most programmers today, because of the way most programmers are wired, the reality is they're just used to do what is very convenient for them. And the use of HTTP is just convenient because really, in my work as a professional, when each time we do an assessment, most of the time we flag, your API is using HTTP, and guess what the response is? They just commonize it. Most of these HTTP are internal. If somebody is internal, they cannot, there's nothing until you then demonstrate to them, that it is actually possible, whether a malicious insider or an external hacker who is an hacker can actually intercept all of these. So if you now say, okay, budget is a constraint, what can you do? My recommendation is that if truly budget is a constraint, is the first thing you need to do is to inventorize all your APIs. And what will that inventory, what will it do to your organization? It will help you to make sure that you're able to differentiate your APIs that actually transmit sensitive data and the one that does not transmit sensitive data. You then prioritize the implementation of HTTPS on the API that handles sensitive data, right? Because there are actually API that handle non-sensitive data, like for instance, maybe there's API that is responsible for transferring what weather forecast, for instance. It's not a sensitive data, right? Or API that is responsible for news and articles. Yes, you might say, okay, you want to use HTTP, but for sensitive data, believe me sincerely, it will be an irresponsible programming for any developer to implement API with HTTP without using HTTPS.
So I really loved your answer on many levels, but the biggest one for me was just that mention of internal APIs. So usually when APIs are leveraged within the enterprise alone, it gives a false sense of security and no one is looking at it, and so we can do whatever we like here. So thank you so much for really responding to that. And my last question here is, what is one underutilized API security best practice that you consider the salt of the earth? I mean, a basic yet potent aspect that may greatly improve an organization's security posture.
Wow, that's a very tricky question. Okay, so well, what I mean by the tricky question is because there are so many, when you talk about APIs protection mechanism, there are a lot of underutilized best practice, but I think from my own experience, because of what we have done over the years, I think basically I'm going to speak to what I call content type and content length validation header. I think for me, it is the salt of the earth. It's the most underutilized API, and I'll say why. Because while we're thinking about using web application firewall, we need to, everybody responsibly today, any APIs, we talk about authentication and authorization control mechanism. But guess what? Most of the time, most programmers, developers do not implement content type and content length validation header. Because if you implement those tools, guess what? It helps you to honestly prevent most common attacks on the APIs. Attacks such as injection attacks, SQL injections, because the content types help you to prevent injections attack, and the content-length validation header helps you to prevent attacks like buffer overflow. Right. I remember one organization that we did a pen test for recently, and because they didn't implement just these two primary basic, yes, they have authentication control, they have authorization control, but they weren't validating input. Guess what? From the APIs, we're able to, and interestingly, it was from their mobile app to the core banking of that organization. And that was the vulnerable point. Honestly, and we know with the usage of, in fact, we just use just three basic tools: Bobsuit as the global interceptor, Postman and the SQL map. And guess what? Before we knew what was happening, we were in their database, harvesting all the sensitive data within that bank in terms of even cardholder data, a lot of things. And you're wondering, just because of those little issues, which are the content type and content length validation header. To me, I think is the most underutilized best practice.
Thank you so much for joining us today at the Virtual Kitchen. And that's how you secure an API in our kitchen. In the coming episodes, we'll be discussing even more API security issues and walking you through how to solve them. Remember to subscribe to CCNet TV, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on new episodes of API Kitchen showing each Thursday. Until then, keep your kitchen clean and your APIs secure.